They sent me the first letter at 3 in the morning, a white envelope with fancy script and a list of rules I'd never agreed to. Trim your hedges, remove the rusted mailbox, repaint the trimmer face fines. I read it in the dim kitchen light, coffee gone cold, and for a moment I laughed because the whole thing felt cartoonish. Then I folded it back up and I understood. This wasn't about paint. It was about control. My name is Avery Hart, and I thought I knew how to stand my ground. I'd spent my life making hard calls, but that winter in Cedar Hollow taught me how ugly small-town power can get when wrapped in a smile. We moved into the house on Maple Crest for the privacy and the trees, not for drama. And at first Cedar Hollow was everything they promised: porches with string lights, mailboxes lined up like obedient soldiers, neighbors who borrowed sugar and returned it with a pie. Then Constance Hale became president of the neighborhood association, and the rules started arriving like edited drafts of someone else's life. Constance had the kind of voice that made people agree before they knew what they were agreeing to. Soft, clipped, and always ended with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She told everyone she wanted order. What she wanted, quickly, was leverage. The harassment crept in small, like mold. A notice about lawn height, a warning about a satellite dish that had been there for years, a complaint that my son's snow, not a son, that was my neighbor's barbecue smoke, was disturbing the peace. They fined me for a mailbox bolt that had rusted in a storm. It cost more in time and in dignity than money. I kept my papers, I wrote them back, and I tried to be reasonable because being reasonable is how you think you keep your dignity. But reason only works when the other side wants agreement. When they want to punish, it becomes a language they understand, not a conversation. There was one night I'll never forget. I was up late, piecing through bank statements for a charity I'm on the board. Off a bit. You know, something to keep the hands busy when the lights flickered in a way that felt different, like someone testing the house. My phone buzzed with an alert from a neighbor's camera, something moving by the back fence. I grabbed my jacket and my coffee, and I walked outside just as the first orange blink caught the eaves. The flames were polite at first, licking at the wrong place, then greedy, and in the way fires do, they made a sound like a living thing. I stood there with a hose that barely worked and a neighbor across the street who kept yelling, "Call 911." And in the background, like a punctuation mark, Constance standing on the other side of the street, hands folded, expression the practiced calm of someone watching a play come to the right act. You can't explain the way the world narrows when something you love is on fire. Time does odd arithmetic seconds stretch, faces blur, but what I remember most is the quiet clarity. The firefighters did their job, the neighborhood rallied, but the house smelled of smoke for months, and my bed smelled like the char of a thing nearly taken. The investigators called it suspicious. I didn't know arson investigators had private vocabularies for suspicious until I watched them say it, like they were testing whether I'd flinch. I flinched. After the fire, I could have left insurance money, a city 2 towns over, the clean slate that comes with a burnout, but there was a ledger in my head that needed balancing. The fines that had felt petty were now part of something larger. The way Constance showed up after the fire with casserole dishes, and the kind of hug that lands like a claim. People started talking in porches and grocery aisles. "Well, maybe you did something to deserve it." And suddenly my life was a rumor with a premium subscription. That's when the quiet work began, because the only thing worse than losing your house to fire is letting your reputation go incinerated too. I started watching things the way I used to watch cases: look for motive, look for opportunity, look for those tiny coincidences that make a story credible. Constance had enemies and she had friends. She also had access. She ran meetings like a conductor and the HOA bank account like a private cookie jar. I knew about human nature. Greed hides in committee minutes, and once I looked, patterns showed up. There were unexplained vendor payments, invoices for landscaping that never happened, and a ledger entry for a community improvement that had been redirected to a shell account. Every small violation the board had ever leveled at me or anyone else fed a machine. Penalties, liens, control. I won't lie, I polished my temper like a weapon. I called an old friend who runs a title company out of state. I asked neighbors for footage and they gave it up slow, like confessions, but give it up they did. Dashcam clips, a Ring camera with a bad angle, a grainy frame that showed a figure with a distinctive coat moving toward my backyard the night of the fire. It was the smallest detail, a patch of embroidery in the shape of an anchor, but it matched the jacket Constance wore to every board meeting. the one with the anchor stitched into the cuff. Coincidence is a comfort to people who want simple answers. Pattern is a problem for them. There was a night one of those neighborhood meetings where the cookies are store-bought and the chairs are set up like a courtroom that I stood in front of the room, and I didn't talk about hedges or mailboxes. I talked about numbers. I slid copies of bank statements across the table like evidence, and the room folded in on itself. Constance smiled, and then she did something I hadn't expected. The smile thinned. She rose. And for a second, she was something else dense, a list of grievances inside her like a script ready to be performed. "You think you can come in here and accuse your neighbors," she said, polite as poison. "You think you can ruin us with insinuations." Then she laughed, the laugh that doesn't reach eyes. And I'm telling you now, it was the sound of someone trying to buy time. People don't change instantly, not really. They fracture. A couple of Constance's allies got quiet. Other people looked at their hands and remembered times they had signed off on things they shouldn't have. Then Constance did something desperate. She brought a man to the meeting, a hulking presence with a jaw like a promise and a shirt with a logo that didn't belong to any local business. He sat down, shoulders filling the chair, and leaned forward. "This property has rules," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel. "You all want peace, you follow the rules." The room went cold. It was the moment I recognized that the fight had moved from petty tyranny to a deliberate attempt to intimidate. Threats are strange when they happen in daylight. They feel like the theater of power, not the power itself. But the man put his hand on the pamphlet in front of him, and it looked to me like someone weighing a gun. "I'm not going to teach you how to threaten someone, but I will tell you how people feel it." A pressure in the air, the tightening of breath. The rest of the neighbors shuffled, some looking relieved, finally a strong hand, others, like me, wanting to make sure the law still had a pulse. The next days were a tangle of police reports and subpoenas, and the kind of neighborly whispers that dig like roots. One of Constance's volunteers, a woman who'd been with the board since the swim club opened, came to me and her hands were shaking. "They told us to sign," she said. "They said they'd find reasons if we didn't." There was fear in her voice, sure, but also disgust. People offered small pieces of the truth like puzzle corners, and slowly the picture came together: embezzlement, threats, the hiring of muscle to grease the gears. It was ugly, and it made the stakes clear. This wasn't a disagreement over paint. It was a takeover disguised as governance. When the police finally swept in, no sirens like the movies, just efficient officers and a woman with handcuffs and a badge, they arrested Constance on charges that were a catalog of small cruelties and large betrayals. In the end, it wasn't one dramatic piece of evidence that toppling her. It was 1,000 ordinary records and a few brave neighbors who remembered details. A transfer on a Tuesday, a phone call at midnight, a ledger line labeled community event that bought a dress for the president's niece. You'd think the law is blunt, but justice is often the slow, patient folding of facts until the whole fabric is revealed. In the aftermath, the neighborhood felt like a house after the fire, cheaper in places, patched, with an echo where something big used to be. People mowed their lawns again, but there was a new kind of watching, a neighborly attention that wasn't suspicion so much as the awareness of how thin the line can be between community and control. I rebuilt parts of the porch myself, nail by careful nail, mostly because the act of fixing felt like stitching a wound closed. And yet nothing was purely clean. Constance denied everything at first. Later she accepted a plea that left some feeling she got off easy and others feeling relieved that it was over. The man with the jaw disappeared into another county where names change like clothes. For me, the victory was never about retribution. It was about standing up when the machine started to grind people down, about not letting a facade of civility hide corruption. There's a cost to that. Trust costs more than money, but it's a price I was willing to pay. So why tell you all this? Because if you live in a place where rules are written as kindness and enforced as power, watch the small things. Keep copies of notices. Look at the books. Don't let the polite smile be the only proof you need. And when things get messy, remember people can be brave in small ways that add up. A camera left pointed a certain way, a neighbor keeping a record, a voice that says, "I remember differently." Those are the things that save you. If you've ever had a neighbor or an organization that turned sweet words into a straitjacket, tell me about it. What did they do? How did you respond? And where did it leave you? Was it justice, or only a new form of quiet? Drop your take in the comments. Argue with me if you want. I am not here to preach. I'm here to listen. Share this if it resonated. And if you want the receipts, no, not those receipts, share your own story. Let's talk about what justice looks like in places that say they care about community, but often care more about control.